So this is one of my favourite paintings by Van Gogh. It was painted in September, approximately September of 1888, and it's called The Night Cafe. And it's the interior of the Café de la Gare in Lamartine, which was owned by Mr. and Mrs. Genoux. Joseph Genoux is the man pictured on the right in a white outfit. And the rest of the people are the sort of what Van Gogh described as the sort of down and outs of the area, staying in the cafe for a bit like nowadays we have the warm places for people who can't afford to have heating. In a way, this provided heating, light, and sort of accommodation for late into the night for people that couldn't afford to go anywhere else. It's a painting that Van Gogh described as one of the ugliest he'd ever painted. He compared it to the Potato Eaters in terms of its ugliness. And he described it in a letter to his brother Theo, as this: I have tried to express the terrible passions of humanity by means of red and green. The room is blood red and dark yellow, with a green billiard table in the middle. There are 4 lemon yellow lamps with a glow of orange and green. Everywhere there is a clash and contrast of the most alien reds and greens, in the figures of little sleeping hooligans in the empty, dreary room in violet and blue. The blood red and the yellow green of the billiard table, for instance, contrast with the soft, tender Louis XV green of the counter, on which there is a rose nosegay. The white clothes of the landlord, watchful in a corner of that furnace, turn lemon yellow or pale luminous green. So he's deliberately chosen clashing colours. He's deliberately tried to make it ugly. Like with the Potato Eaters, he's trying to show what he thinks of the ugliness of humanity when it's at its depths of poverty, and it's a moral statement, really. But it's also a very interesting painting because there's so much going on in it. There are lots and lots of theories on this painting. I'm going to go with my own ones, which are based on things I've read and things that I've interpreted myself. So for me, Joseph Genoux, the owner, is strange in white and looks almost like a clinician to me. The billiard table for me feels more coffin-like, or even like a morgue table. It reminds me of some awful sort of overlit clinical room, like a morgue room or a room where a coffin would be. The lamps on the walls for me look like eyes watching the room, like almost Orwellian, although obviously this was way before then. But there's something about the sort of big brother feeling of those eyes looking down, almost sort of like mystical eyes, which could be almost looking at you from the afterlife. The only joy in the room that Van Gogh describes is the elegance of that Louis XV green on the counter and the flowers. That's the only sort of hopeful thing in the room. All of the people are slumped, apart from maybe the people at the back who look a little bit more alert. But there's something really depressing about this, but also at the same time, it's very trippy, psychedelic. I mean, often Van Gogh was very trippy and psychedelic possibly because of the medication he was on, or possibly because he was himself quite trippy from the absinthe or the smell of the paints or whatever was going on. Once again, the empty chairs remind you of characters. They have an individual character about each one of them. So one could argue that those are the chairs of people that have passed on, that the people are now non-existent. The floor is very much like the yellow room painting, which came after this, because this establishment was where Van Gogh rented a room before he went to the Yellow House. But there is a very similar floor here. I mean, obviously the floors were wooden, but for me, this feels like almost like the field that he paints before he dies, which has got this sort of sense of rolling straw, bleached out grasses rolling into the background. The curtain at the back leads to nothing better than what we've got in the front. And the walls, yes, on the right hand side, there's a rather strange picture that looks almost like a furnace. So for me, this feels like some premonition of death. It wasn't long before he died, actually. And it really does feel like it's almost like a glance into the future. And it feels a bit hopeless. It feels like there's not much hope for anyone in there. And you'd think, him being a man of religion, that he might have wanted to give some hope to these characters. I suppose you could argue that the eyes, the all-seeing eyes, which are lamps on the walls, could be the sort of view of, or the overseeing by the Almighty. Because, of course, we know that Van Gogh was incredibly religious, and that he was originally going to be a man of the cloth and then converted to painting as his religion. So for me, this has a lot of intensity in it as a painting. It's also very strange, the shadow cast by the billiard table, because with the lighting that's in that room, even with the light above, which is directly above the billiard table, it would not cast that sort of shadow. So once again, Van Gogh is always playing with light and not being true to the actual light, but just using the light as he needs it to be used. It's also interesting how Joseph Genu is actually looking at us, viewing the picture, as if he's in on something and he's trying to convey that to us, and he understands that he's being watched by us, whereas no one else in the room is aware of us. So it's almost like we're glimpsing or time traveling somehow in this. We are part of this picture. We are being observed by Joseph Genu, and we are a part of this picture. It's almost like we are in the room sitting with these people. Are we one of these people? Are we looking down on these people? Are we part of them? Are we separated from them? Are we part of this ugly state of humanity, this ugly poverty that Van Gogh was so passionate about? He felt so passionate that people were suffering because he himself was suffering. He was impoverished, but not completely, because his brother Theo was often sending him money and looking after him and sending him paints and paying for his accommodation. I mean, Van Gogh only sold one picture in his whole lifetime, and the rest of them he sort of like bartered for alcohol or accommodation or whatever it was he needed. So he was living a frugal life. And he liked that, in the sense that he felt that he was a part of humanity, a part of the struggle. So there's a lot going on in this room. And there's also supposedly some significance about 12:10, but I'm not quite sure what that is, but we can see the clock is pretty much central to this picture. Yes, there's so much there. It's an incredible painting. And the more you look at it, the more you realize how bizarre this picture is, how powerful, how impactful this picture is. And also the other thing is that Joseph Genu is often seen to be possibly a representation of Van Gogh himself. There are very few pictures with Van Gogh and himself. That obviously we've got the self-portraits, but we haven't really got him as a sort of current figure in his work. there's one picture that was actually destroyed in, I think in a fire, of him as the artist walking along a road in Arles with his paints and his rolled up canvases and everything, or papers. But we don't really normally see him within a group setting. He's always seen either as a self-portrait or larger than life, really. But if I'm not mistaken, I don't. There's also actually one picture of him in a jail yard. So this is one of the few paintings that I was referring to. This is Prisoners Exercising, which was done a couple of years after the cafe painting. And it was inspired by the artist Doré or Dor. So there he is looking out in the center of the painting, looking out towards us. And this figure somehow reminds me of the one in the cafe painting. I know obviously the clothing is different, but the sort of the shape of the body, it just reminds me a little bit of that cafe painting. And as I said, there are so few paintings of Van Gogh himself within group settings. So I do feel like the one in the cafe is him looking back at us. And what is he trying to say? What is he trying to say to us? He's grey. So is this a glimpse into the future of Van Gogh? State that he thinks, like almost like a purgatory, that white clinician, almost like the sanatorium clinician's outfit from when he was in sanatorium. I wonder if that was something about why he painted Ginu in the white. We'll never know, but it's just speculation. But speculation is fun and interesting. And I recommend you do it with any painting, because in the end, it's your own speculation, your own ideas about a painting which are most important, because you can learn about what the artist intended, but it's how you respond and how you feel when you look at the painting.